Support for this podcast comes from the Central Valley Journalism Collaborative, connecting communities with the resources, infrastructure, and networks to ensure a vibrant local free press.
From KVPR in Fresno, this is Central Valley Daily. It's Tuesday, May 19th. I'm Sarith Hawk. Right now, the average price for a regular unleaded gallon of gas in the Central Valley is just over $6, and there's one factor in particular causing the bump at the pump.
The war, the Iran-Israel war, has kind of shocked global oil markets.
But that's not the only thing. Today, we break down gas prices with a CalMatters reporter and discuss whether they could continue to rise. But first, these headlines. The Pac-12 and Mountain West conferences have reached an agreement, at least in principle, to resolve pending lawsuits over so-called poaching and exit fees. The conferences issued a joint statement on Monday saying the parties agreed to suspend lawsuits in California and Colorado. That's while the conferences, quote, work to negotiate and finalize the settlement. Fresno State will officially join the Pac-12 conference in July. A progressive U.S. senator has endorsed a Fresno area candidate for the state legislature. Bernie Sanders threw his support behind Sandra Celedon last week. She's running for the state's 31st Assembly District. The seat is being vacated by Dr. Joaquin Arambula. Sanders also previously threw his support behind an up-and-coming candidate, Randy Villegas, who is looking to unseat Republican David Valadao in the 22nd Congressional District. Last week, New York Congresswoman Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez also endorsed him in the race. Grizzly bears could return to California more than a century after they were hunted into extinction. It's under a divisive state bill. Marek Warzowski reports on the push and the pushback.
SB 1305 cleared its second committee hearing this month. If passed, it would ask wildlife officials to look into how exactly grizzlies could be reintroduced. Opponents include livestock industry groups. They claim the state is in no position to introduce another apex predator, especially after the recent return of gray wolves. California was home to 10,000 grizzly bears before the gold rush. They roamed the Sierra Nevada foothills, the Central Valley, and coastal areas. Today they exist only as a symbol of the past, walking across a patch of grass on the state flag. For KVPR News, I'm Marek Warzowski.
A proposal into Governor Gavin Newsom's state budget could stall California's mobile crisis program. That's an initiative that sends behavioral health workers instead of police to respond to mental health emergencies. CalMatters' Ana Ibarra explains.
In 2023, California made the Mobile Crisis Service a statewide benefit, using temporary federal funding that covered 85% of costs. But now that federal funding is decreasing to 50%, and Governor Newsom's proposed budget seeks to make the service optional, instead of having the state cover the funding gap. That means counties that choose to keep the service would have to pay for it themselves, at a price tag of $150 million to $200 million a year. Some counties say they'll have to reduce the hours their teams work or cut the service entirely. Rural counties that have just gotten their programs off the ground say they won't be able to keep them going without state help. Though the program started as a Medi-Cal benefit for low-income residents, teams also respond to the uninsured and those with private insurance. The legislature has until June 15th to approve the change, along with the rest of Governor Newsom's proposed budget.
That was Ana Ibarra with CalMatters. California is experiencing the largest known outbreak of deadly mushroom poisonings in U.S. history. According to the latest figures, there have been 47 confirmed poisoning cases since November. That includes 4 deaths and at least 4 illnesses that required liver transplants, according to state officials. The outbreak has stretched across at least 12 counties in Northern California and the Central Coast.
Few things in life are certain, but astronomical auto repair bills, that's a sure thing. If the time has come to say goodbye to your old ride, consider donating it to KVPR. The process is free, it'll help fund the independent reporting you rely on, and you'll get a tax break. Visit kvpr.org/cars today for more information and to start the donation process.
And now to our main story. California's gas prices remain consistently higher than the national average, but we could see even higher prices as we head into the summer. At the heart of this recent price jump has been the war in Iran and the closure of the Strait of Hormuz. The strait borders Iran and is a key shipping route. Its closure has dragged on for months and strangled the world's supply of oil. And in response, California has tried to pivot to meet demand. But the war has highlighted another pressure point for California's sources of oil: fewer operating oil refineries. I spoke with Alejandro Lazo, a climate reporter with our news partner CalMatters, about how the oil refining process works and what that means for prices at the pump. He starts by telling me about where California sources its oil.
Yeah, so California gets its gasoline from both crude oil and from refined product. In terms of crude, we get about 40% or so in state. And from Alaska, the rest comes from Latin America, these days, particularly Brazil, Canada, Iraq, Saudi Arabia, the UAE, Guyana, Ecuador. Refined product, the state is seeing more finished gasoline coming in. That comes in mostly from the U.S. Gulf Coast, sometimes with the Bahamas as a transit hub, plus India, South Korea, Japan, Taiwan. Since the start of the Iran-Israel war, refiners have begun pivoting away from the Persian Gulf due to the issues that we've been having there with the Strait of Hormuz, and have been sourcing from Latin America and Asia more.
Got it. So it's a mixture of crude oil that needs to be refined and then product that's already ready to go.
You got it. Yeah.
So we're here today because you recently reported that gas prices could actually go even higher than they are right now. California's average is over $6 a gallon. So before we get into why, I just thought we could break down more of how the oil process works. You mentioned where we're getting this product from. My understanding is that once we actually get the gasoline, it's not just going to a gas station, but a refinery process. What does that look like in the state?
California has a number of refineries here in state, and we refine our own blend, a special blend that California law requires people to burn. We are, for the most part, cut off from the rest of the country's refined gas supply. So it's very difficult to get refined gasoline from Texas or other places because there's just no pipeline that comes here. So we rely on our own refineries. And of course, as we just discussed, imports to meet our demand. And we have very old refineries, and lately, in the last 6 months or so, 2 important ones have shut down. So there's been increased pressure on our refining capacity, so that ability to take crude oil and transform it over into the kind of product that you get at the gas station.
Right, and since we get so much crude oil product in, we actually need capacity to go through that process.
Yeah, exactly. That is sort of the tension that we've been kind of coming to lately. It's just that we need our refineries to be able to provide the supply that we need, while at the same time, California is sort of encouraging a transition away from fossil fuels. So the state is trying to kind of balance those 2 objectives, and it's tricky and it's difficult. And the Iran-Israel war, has kind of shocked global oil markets, and that's raised prices everywhere. But in particular, California drivers have been feeling it. So it's just one issue layered on top of the other.
Right. And you mentioned trying to be more clean energy burning and fossil fuel using. And when we talk about that balance, California state regulators have actually approved more oil drilling permits in the first few months of this year alone than really in the past couple years combined. And a major source of oil and gas in California is Kern County here in our area, produces nearly 80% of the state's supply. So what happens to the oil that's extracted from California? Is drilling more the answer? I mean, what are experts really saying?
Well, so certainly there's been more permits issued for drilling, and I think we need to take a more careful look as to what the result of those permits are. I think the question that you have, we haven't quite answered yet. Is there more drilling and is there more local supply or, state supply in the system because of, recent regulatory changes that were approved last year that allowed for more drilling in Kern County? I think that's a key and important question, and one that a lot of folks are asking. Now, that move to increase local supply or local sources of oil, that was done so that to stabilize refineries. Basically, the argument from the oil industry was that we just needed more local oil flowing to local refineries, and that would help stabilize refineries. Experts will say that doesn't really do anything for the global price of oil or for the price at the pump, because that is set by the global price of oil.
You report that gas prices continue to rise. How does all of this really, when we're looking in the future now with the decreased supply, the war in Iran, how much could it go up? How much more could it go up?
Yeah, so that's a great question. I mean, California has a unique structural market. We're isolated. We have that special fuel blend. There are higher taxes here, and there are certainly environmental fees that are paid here. We're currently above $6 a gallon. The California Energy Commission recently estimated that we would see some increases, perhaps if after this 6 weeks period, so somewhere in June, they estimated that they had visibility into supply up into that moment, and then from then on, prices could go up to close to $7, but it would likely settle out once people start competing. In other words, once consumers start looking for different gas stations and sort of this natural competition emerges, prices will sort of settle out around $6.50. That was the California Energy Commission's estimate. However, the other experts say, look, if the Strait of Hormuz remains closed for a significant amount of time, we could see the global price of oil increase by $40 or $80. And if we see sort of a kind of dire situation like that, we could see prices go up by $1 or $2 more than where they are now. So it's not clear just how much, but certainly there's kind of a scary range.
Yeah, and we've heard from politicians talking about suspending the gas tax, which is part of the cost of a gallon. Can you break down how much more, how much taxes really factor into the cost of a gallon? And, why is California so much higher than the rest of the national average in terms of gas prices?
Yeah, California's gas tax is about 61 cents a gallon, and that's among the highest in the country, generates nearly $8 billion a year, and that funds road and highway repairs. So, right, there have been some calls from, gubernatorial candidates to suspend that gas tax, for a gas tax holiday. But, other politicians and other experts argue that, well, if you do that, then where do you get these critical funds for road and highway repairs? So everything has a trade-off.
Alejandro Lazo, climate reporter with CalMatters. Thanks for joining me.
Well, thank you very much for having me.
And that's today's show. Today's episode was produced by Jonathan Linden and KVPR with support from the Central Valley Journalism Collaborative. I'm Sarith Hawk. Find the latest local news anytime at kvpr.org.
You know, every day on Up First, NPR's Golden Globe-nominated morning news podcast, we bring you 3 essential stories. At the heart of each story are questions. What really happened? What really mattered? What happens next? At NPR, we stand for your right to be curious and to follow the facts. Follow Up First wherever you get your podcasts and start your day knowing what matters and why.